It's week 15 of the NFL season, and here are my predictions for this week. But first, how did I do last week in my predictions? In week 14, I went 6-7. So kicking off the week on Thursday Night Football, we have the 7-6 Rams versus the 6-7 49ers. The Rams are coming off a very close win, 44-42 against the Bills. In this game, Matthew Stafford went 23 of 30, 320 yards and 2 touchdowns. Kyren Williams had 87 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. And Puka Nacua had 12 receptions for 162 yards and a touchdown. Then for the 49ers, they beat the Bears 38-13. In that game, Brock Purdy went 20 of 25 with 325 yards and 2 touchdowns. Then Isaac Guerrero had 78 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns and 2 receptions for 50 yards. And George Kittle had 6 receptions for 151 yards. And on defense, they had 7 sacks. But coming into this game, the Rams have won 3 out of 4 games. And for the 49ers, Nick Bosa is still questionable and Isaac Guerrero is also questionable. So they could potentially be on their 4th string running back. And I got the Rams winning. Then moving over to Sunday, the 12-1 Chiefs versus the 3-10 Browns. The Chiefs are coming off a 19-17 win against the Chargers, and they won that game on a walk-off 31-yard field goal, and Patrick Mahomes went 24 of 37, 210 yards and a touchdown. Then Isaiah Pacheco had 55 yards rushing, and Travis Kelce led them with 5 receptions for 45 yards. Then for the Browns, they're coming off a 27-14 loss against the Steelers. Jameis Winston went 24 of 41, 212 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Nick Chubb had 48 yards rushing, and Jerry Jeudy had 5 receptions, 64 yards, and a touchdown. And he is now 4th in the NFL in receiving yards this season, with 944, and is currently on pace for over 1,200 yards this season. So he's really having a great year. But the Chiefs are just a much better team, and I have the Chiefs winning. Then the 8-5 Ravens versus the 2-11 Giants. The Ravens are coming off their bye week, and in their last game in week 13, they lost 24-19 against the Eagles. Then for the Giants, they're coming off a 14-11 loss against the Saints, and the Giants made this game very close. In one of the last drives of the game, they forced a 3-and-out for the Saints and got the ball back with a minute 21. And they drove down the field and attempted a 35-yard walk-off field goal with 11 seconds left, and the kick was blocked, and that was the end of the game. Drew Lock in this game had 227 yards and an interception, and he also had 59 yards rushing. Then Malik Nabers led them with 5 receptions for 79 yards. And I have the Ravens winning. Then the 3-10 Jets versus the 3-10 Jaguars. The Jets are coming off a 32-26 loss against the Dolphins in overtime, and the Jets were leading in this game very late in the 4th quarter, but Jason Sanders hit a 52-yard field goal to tie the game with 7 seconds left on the clock. Then in overtime, the Dolphins got the ball first, and Jonnu Smith caught a 10-yard touchdown. But Aaron Rodgers went 27 of 39, 339 yards and a touchdown. Braylon Allen had 43 yards rushing, and Garrett Wilson had 7 receptions for 114 yards. Then for the Jaguars, they're coming off a 10-6 win against the Titans. Mac Jones went 23 of 31, 220 yards and 2 interceptions. Tank Bigsby had 55 yards rushing and a touchdown. And Brian Thomas Jr. had 8 receptions for 86 yards. For this week, Breece Hall is still questionable, and he missed last week's game. So I have the Jaguars winning. Then the 5-8 Cowboys versus the 3-10 Panthers. The Cowboys are coming off a 27-20 loss against the Bengals on Monday Night Football. Cooper Rush went 16 of 31, 183 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Rico Dowdle had 131 yards rushing, and CeeDee Lamb had 6 receptions, 93 yards, and a touchdown. Then for the Panthers, they're coming off a 22-16 loss against the Eagles, and this was actually a very close game. And on one of the last drives of the game, Bryce Young threw a deep ball to Xavier Legette, and he would have been down either at the 1 or it would have been a touchdown. But it was incomplete, and they ended up turning it over on downs. In that game, Bryce Young had 191 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Chuba Hubbard had 92 yards rushing and a touchdown, and now has his first 1,000-yard season. And Adam Thielen had 9 receptions for 102 yards. But the Panthers have been playing very good lately, and I have the Panthers winning. Then the 8-5 Commanders versus the 5-8 Saints. The Commanders are coming off their bye week, and in week 13 in their last game, they won 42-19 against the Titans. Then for the Saints, in their win against the Giants, Derek Carr went 20 of 31, 219 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. But in that game, he fractured his hand and is likely to miss this week. Then Alvin Kamara was held to just 44 yards rushing, and their leading receiver was Marquez Valdes-Scantling with 4 receptions for 51 yards. And I have the Commanders winning. Then the 5-8 Bengals versus the 3-10 Titans. In the Bengals win against the Cowboys, Joe Burrow went 33 of 44, 369 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. And now he leads the NFL in passing yards and passing touchdowns with 3,700 yards and 33 touchdowns to just 6 interceptions. And if the Bengals find a way to make the playoffs, Joe Burrow has a real shot at winning MVP. Chase Brown had a great game with 58 yards rushing and 6 receptions for 65 yards and a touchdown. And Jamar Chase had an amazing game with 14 receptions, 177 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And he now leads the NFL in receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns with 93 receptions, 1,300 yards, and 15 touchdowns. Then in the Titans' loss against the Jaguars, Tony Pollard had 102 yards rushing, and Calvin Ridley had 7 receptions for 59 yards. And I had the Bengals winning. Then the 6-7 Dolphins versus the 8-5 Texans. In the Dolphins' overtime win against the Jets, Tua went 33 of 47, 331 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Devin Achane had 24 yards rushing and a touchdown, and 6 receptions for 45 yards. And Tyreek Hill led them with 10 receptions, 115 yards, and a touchdown. And surprisingly, that was his first 100-yard game since week 1. Then for the Texans, they're coming off their bye week, and in week 13, they beat the Jaguars 23-20. But this season, they haven't looked as sharp as they did last season. The Dolphins have currently won 4 out of 5 games, and they're still one of the hottest teams in the NFL, and I have the Dolphins winning. Then the 6-7 Colts versus the 8-5 Broncos. They're both coming off their bye weeks, and in week 13, the Colts won 25-24 against the Patriots, and the Broncos beat the Browns 41-32 on Monday Night Football. I think this could be a very close game. Both of these teams are fighting for a playoff spot, and with a Colts loss here, they would be 3 games back of the Broncos for a wildcard spot, but they would still be in contention to win their division. But the Broncos have the best pass rush in the NFL. They lead the NFL in sacks with 47, and they also have the best corner in the NFL with Patrick Surtain. So I have the Broncos winning. Then the 3-10 Patriots versus the 6-7 Cardinals. The Patriots are coming off their bye week, and in their last game in week 13, they lost 25-24 against the Colts. Then for the Cardinals, they're coming off a 30-18 loss against the Seahawks, and they have now lost 3 games in a row. And in that game, Kyler Murray went 25 of 38, 259 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. James Conner had 90 yards rushing, and Trey McBride had 7 receptions for 70 yards. Even though the Cardinals have been struggling a lot lately, I think they're going to bounce back this week and win. Then we have the 10-3 Bills versus the 12-1 Lions, and this could potentially be a preview of the Super Bowl. But last week for the Bills, in their loss against the Rams, Josh Allen went 22 of 37, 342 yards, and 3 touchdowns, and had 82 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns. So he's the first player in NFL history to have 3 passing touchdowns and 3 rushing touchdowns in the same game. And Khalil Shakir led them with 5 receptions for 106 yards and a touchdown. Then for the Lions, they're coming off of a 34-31 win against the Packers on Thursday Night Football, and they won this game on a 35-yard walk-off field goal with zeros on the clock. Jared Goff went 32 of 41, 283 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. David Montgomery led them with 51 yards rushing and a touchdown, and Tim Patrick had a great game with 6 receptions, 43 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And Jameson Williams led them with 80 yards receiving. I think this game is going to be very high scoring and very close. I could definitely see it very similar to last week's Bills game, where both teams scored over 40, but I have the Lions winning. Then the 7-6 Buccaneers versus the 8-5 Chargers. The Buccaneers are coming off a 28-13 win against the Raiders. Baker Mayfield went 18 of 29, 295 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Rachaad White had 90 yards rushing and a touchdown, and Cade Cotton led them with 3 receptions for 70 yards. Then for the Chargers, in their loss against the Chiefs, Justin Herbert went 21 of 30, 213 yards and a touchdown. Gus Edwards had 36 yards rushing and a touchdown, and Joshua Palmer had 6 receptions for 78 yards. But the Chargers are very injured right now. Ladd McConkey's still questionable after missing that Chiefs game. Justin Herbert's now questionable, and Will Dissly is likely to miss the next few weeks, but is not expected to go on IR. But the Buccaneers have been very hot lately, winning 3 games in a row, so I have the Buccaneers winning. Then the 10-3 Steelers versus the 11-2 Eagles. In the Steelers win against the Browns, Russell Wilson went 15 of 26, 158 yards and 2 touchdowns. Najee Harris had 53 yards rushing and a touchdown, and Pat Freiermuth had 3 receptions, 48 yards and a touchdown. But their offense struggled a lot without George Pickens, and he's not expected to play this week again. Then for the Eagles, in their win against the Panthers, Jalen Hurts went 14 of 21, 108 yards and 2 touchdowns, and had 59 yards rushing and a touchdown. Then Saquon Barkley had 124 yards rushing, and he's now at 1,623 yards on the season, and that broke the Eagles' single-season rushing record. And he's still on pace for over 2,100 yards, and that will break the NFL record if he hits it. And I have the Eagles winning. Then on Sunday Night Football, the 9-4 Packers versus the 8-5 Seahawks. In the Packers' loss against the Lions, Jordan Love went 12 of 20, 206 yards and a touchdown. Josh Jacobs had a huge game with 66 yards rushing and 3 rushing touchdowns. And Christian Watson had 4 receptions for 114 yards. Then for the Seahawks, in their win against the Cardinals, Geno Smith went 24 of 30, 233 yards and a touchdown. Zach Charbonnet had 134 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns, while also having 7 receptions for 59 yards. And Jackson Smith-Njigba led them with 5 receptions, 82 yards and a touchdown. The Seahawks have now won 4 games in a row, and Kenneth Walker is again questionable this week. And even if he doesn't play, Zach Charbonnet has been playing great when he has a lot of carries. And I have the Seahawks winning. Then moving over to Monday, there's 2 Monday Night Football games. In the first game, we got the 4-9 Bears versus the 11-2 Vikings. In the Bears' loss against the 49ers, Caleb Williams went 17 of 23, 134 yards and 2 touchdowns. DeAndre Swift was held to just 38 yards rushing, and DJ Moore had 6 receptions for 49 yards. Then for the Vikings, they beat the Falcons 42-21, and that game was tied 21-21 entering the 4th quarter, and the Vikings ended up scoring 21 unanswered points in the 4th. And Sam Darnold had an amazing game, going 22 of 28, 347 yards and 5 touchdowns. Aaron Jones had 73 yards rushing and a touchdown. Then Jordan Addison had 8 receptions for 133 yards and 3 touchdowns. And Justin Jefferson had 7 receptions for 132 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Bears have lost 7 games in a row, and the Vikings are just a much better team, and I have the Vikings winning. Then finally, the 6-7 Falcons versus the 2-11 Raiders. In the Falcons' loss against the Vikings, Kirk Cousins went 23 of 37, 344 yards and 2 interceptions, and over his last 4 games, he has thrown 0 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. Then also in that game, Bijan Robinson had 92 yards rushing and a touchdown, and Darnell Mooney had 6 receptions for 142 yards. Then in the Raiders' loss against the Buccaneers, Aiden O'Connell started off this game 11 of 19, 104 yards, and an interception. He left this game early and was later diagnosed with a bone bruise to his left knee. Then Michael Mayer had 7 receptions for 68 yards. But the Raiders have just been very bad all season long, and I had the Falcons getting the win to break their 4-game losing streak. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. Goodbye.